Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating document called Military AI Through the Energetic Paradigm. You know, if you've been scrolling the news lately, you probably think you have a pretty good handle on how artificial intelligence is changing modern warfare. But honestly, the reality is so much more complex, structural, and frankly, way more interesting than what the standard headlines give us. We're going to break down the actual, often misunderstood role of AI on the battlefield right now. So we're skipping the sci-fi tropes to look at how military intelligence literally functions today. Okay, let's dive into this. On one hand, we've got this dominant Hollywood myth, right? Autonomous, killing machines, the robotic soldier, the self-directed drone swarm, basically a Terminator deciding who lives and dies out there. But reality check, current military AI is actually quite different. It acts as an infrastructure of perception. It isn't primarily out there replacing generals or physically pulling triggers. Instead, it's this massive, incredibly complex data processing infrastructure. It takes an absolutely overwhelming amount of information from satellites, drones, and social media and fuses it together just to make sense of a really chaotic environment. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with myth versus military reality, then move to war as state construction. Third, we'll look at the danger of verification collapse, then corporate power and sovereignty, and finally, automating war and responsibility. Let's get right into that first topic. Section 1. Myth versus military reality. You know, our collective fears about AI usually zoom right in on that final act of violence, the exact millisecond a weapon fires. But this source material makes a super compelling case that our anxieties are kind of misplaced, or at least they're focused on totally the wrong part of the timeline. The decisive transformation actually happens way before a trigger is ever pulled. Look, modern militaries are literally drowning in data. We're talking satellite imagery, intercepted comms, geolocation traces, drone feeds. It's wild. No human staff can possibly process all that. So AI steps into this unmanageable field not as a weapon, but as a lens. It's an intelligence multiplier. It fuses these massive, messy data streams into a clear, usable operational picture. The real power of AI here is constructing reality for decision makers, telling them what's happening right now before any tactical choice is even on the table. Moving to Section 2, War as State Construction. So if AI is filtering the world, we really have to look at how militaries actually use this data to build a working understanding of a chaotic, actively deceptive, and, let's face it, partially observed battlefield. The source text introduces this game-changing concept called the energetic paradigm. It's a framework that treats military intelligence as the careful allocation of scarce attention and verification capacity. We usually just assume militaries lack data or lack weapons, right? But the true scarcity in modern war isn't data, it's usable human attention. The organization suffers from what the paper calls an energetic imbalance, when the sheer flood of incoming information vastly outweighs the institution's human ability to actually interpret, verify, and act on it. And this brilliantly illustrates what they mean by energy. We aren't talking about electricity or fuel for tanks here. We're talking about human and institutional bottlenecks. Things like analyst time, command attention, communication bandwidth, computational resources, verification effort, legal review, and political authorization. These are the unexpected, highly limited resources that have to be meticulously managed. Think about it. If an AI system successfully flags 10,000 potential targets, but doing so totally overloads the downstream human reviewers and legal teams, well, that local technical success actually causes a massive global decision failure. The energy is misallocated. Which brings us to Section 3, the danger of verification collapse. Because AI operates at computational speeds, it massively shrinks the time between observation and military action. And that compression, it introduces a brand new, highly dangerous structural risk to the chain of command. Look at this critical equation. Lambda generation is greater than mu verification. To put that in plain English, it means the rate at which the machine generates actionable claims is suddenly greater than the human rate of responsible verification. The technical system is just spitting out target recommendations and route plans way, way faster than qualified humans can possibly review the actual underlying evidence. So what happens when the machine outpaces human judgment? Just think about that for a second. When this mathematical imbalance happens day after day, a military organization basically has two choices. It either builds up a huge, unmanageable backlog of data, or, and this is far more likely in a high-stakes conflict, it fatally reduces its depth of review. The human verification process simply collapses under the sheer weight of machine generation. And this leads to a really vital operational distinction. We've all heard the buzzword human in the loop.
But if a reviewer only has a few seconds to click approve on a highly complex AI target, their presence is purely ceremonial. The machine is fully controlling the tempo, format, and volume of the decision. Now contrast that with the much harder but absolutely necessary alternative: human capable of judgment. True judgment requires time, raw information, authority, and most importantly, the cognitive independence to actively reject the machine's framing and ask, hey, could this underlying data actually be wrong or manipulated?
Section 4. Corporate Power and Sovereignty. Stepping back from the tactical side, we're seeing a much broader geopolitical power shift with the rapid rise of a brand new military technology complex. I absolutely love this quote from the text. Dependence on external infrastructure does not automatically destroy sovereignty, but it creates hidden veto points and unaccountable control surfaces. Armed forces today aren't just buying finished weapons from defense contractors anymore. They are inextricably tied to commercial satellites, private cloud platforms, and civilian software engineers. And here's the catch. Because business leaders naturally prioritize ROI and commercial scalability, these private tech systems aren't built strictly for military strategy. They're built for profit and growth. Yet they are now deeply embedded in the intelligence loop, creating real vulnerabilities that militaries just can't directly control. This brings us to the concept of decision sovereignty. Basically, this means a military retaining the actual, practical authority to define its goals, allocate resources, and terminate operations. To ground this abstract idea, the text points to a very real-world example: the Starlink controversy during the war in Ukraine. When a private commercial communications network becomes operationally indispensable to a nation's military, decisions about whether it's available or not take on massive strategic consequences. Without holding any public office or democratic mandate whatsoever, private corporate actors can suddenly acquire sovereign influence over escalation and the practical feasibility of military operations. It's a total game changer.
Finally, Section 5, Automating War and Responsibility.
Let's move to and see how this builds into maintaining human responsibility in such a completely distributed system. The paper answers this with what it calls the Large Energy Model, or LEM. Now, this isn't a language model, it's an operational architecture needed to close these complex intelligence loops. The sequence goes like this: observation, interpretation, authorization, action, verification, and repair. The text argues that true intelligence doesn't live in a single targeting algorithm. It lives in this entire closed institutional loop. If a high-tech system can generate targets but completely lacks the pathway to attribute error or repair its model when it makes a mistake, well, it's just not a complete intelligence system. So the crucial point is we desperately need a responsibility ledger. Look at this breakdown. If there's bad data, accountability falls on sensor networks and integrators. Model error? That's on civilian engineers and data scientists. Inadequate review falls to the military analysts. And impossible timelines? That is a straight-up failure of the command structure. You can't just vaguely blame the AI. Fragmented responsibility is incredibly dangerous. Accurately attributing error across this whole human-machine system is a forward-looking control mechanism. It's absolutely necessary for the system to learn. It's not just some moral judgment slapped on after the fact. On top of that, because the battlefield isn't just uncertain, but actively deceptive, think camouflaged electronic warfare, false data signals fed to the AI on purpose, these systems require continual integrity checking. Every single model update has to fit recent observations, preserve required capabilities, explicitly respect authority, remain compatible with constraints, and, crucially, it must be able to be rolled back. Without this strict, ongoing structure, human oversight just becomes a convenient liability shield. An institution might legally claim a human made the final call, while in reality, that human was forced into a machine-shaped process that offered absolutely no real discretion. Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought to take away from this analysis. As we watch this military technology complex rapidly emerge, the ultimate question isn't whether the machine can fire the weapon, but whether the surrounding system still knows what it is doing. The true hidden danger isn't some sci-fi Terminator. It's an entire technological infrastructure where observation, action, and responsibility no longer connect, leaving humans nominally in charge, but systematically blind. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and I really encourage you to keep questioning the architecture of the systems being built around us.